Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to start this journey by asking yourself a fundamental question. What if life isn't just carbon-based?
Hmm.
What if everything we currently define as biology, the need for water, chemical bonds, all that dense molecular structure, what if that's just one single branch of the evolutionary tree?
It's a pretty mind-bending thought experiment.
Exactly. What if entire, complex, and intelligent ecosystems exist right here on Earth, but made of something invisible to us, like complex plasma?
That is the truly provocative challenge set forth by the source material we are diving into today. Our mission, really, is to unpack the theoretical biophysics of these macroscopic plasma life forms.
And this is based heavily on the work of an independent researcher, right?
Yes, J. Alfred, who proposed his dark plasma hypothesis back around 2005, he laid out a pretty detailed framework.
Okay, so his hypothesis predicts these entities exist in what he calls dark Earths. What exactly are those?
Basically, complex, self-interacting dark plasmaspheres. Think of them like, well, ghostly counterparts to our Earth, coupled gravitationally to our ordinary matter planet.
So we're going far beyond just theoretical dark matter particles here.
Yeah.
We're talking functional biology, almost,
Yeah,
but for entities that are inherently electromagnetic.
precisely. We're exploring how they might look, how they might move, communicate, even how their cognition could work.
It's a deep dive that really merges physics, biology, dark matter theory, where it pulls it all together into one theoretical framework. It's ambitious stuff.
It absolutely is. And we need to approach this by starting with the basics, really. Plasma dynamics. We're extrapolating from things we do observe, like auroras, stellar coronas, that kind of thing,
Right.
and projecting those properties onto potentially self-organized, self-interacting entities. If this dark plasma exists, it probably follows the same universal physical rules as ordinary plasma, just, with different constituent particles.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this right away then. Section 1. The physics of the invisible density and weight. How can something be alive, potentially intelligent, yet be almost non-existent in terms of mass and density compared to us?
Well, it starts with the fundamental nature of plasma itself, the fourth state of matter. Unlike solids or liquids, ordinary matter plasma is inherently low density.
And why is that?
It's pretty straightforward physics, actually. The particles are ionized, right? So they have high kinetic energy. And if they share the same charge, they naturally repel each other quite strongly.
Okay.
That energy and repulsion just naturally keeps the structure dispersed. And dispersed structures, well, they have low density.
So if we take that basic physics and apply it to these theoretical dark plasma life forms, their natural state, their sort of resting state, would be one of very low density.
Exactly. Very low density, which means very little mass and weight compared to ordinary objects of the same size.
And this low density leads to them being described as collisionless. What does that mean in practical terms?
Think of it less like billiard balls bouncing off each other and more like maybe distant magnetic fields just influencing each other as they pass. They're primarily electromagnetic energy fields interacting, typically quite weakly at a distance.
So collisionless suggests they can just pass right through each other most of the time without any real incident.
Generally, yes, that seems to be the baseline state according to the theory. They can interpenetrate. However, if they deliberately occupy the same space or if one actively passes through another,
And then there's some interaction.
right, then you get localized interactions. The source suggests this might manifest as weak, dark electrical sensations, almost like a faint static charge.
Okay.
And if they intentionally increase their own particle density quite dramatically or maybe thicken the plasma sheath that supposedly encases their bodies,
So they can become somewhat solid?
mildly collisional maybe, it could create a temporary weak resistance. Imagine moving your hand through very thin syrup or feeling that slight surface tension on water or something like that.
This implies that manipulating their own density is a critical physiological process for them.
Absolutely fundamental. It's like muscle contraction and relaxation for us, but on a much more fundamental structural level.
Wow.
And it gets more complex because the theory posits they're not just simple plasma, but complex plasma, sometimes called dusty plasma.
Dusty plasma.
Yeah.
Because they include dust particles.
Or the dark matter equivalent of charged dust particles, yes. This added structural complexity is what theoretically allows them to exist in various phases beyond just being a dispersed gas.
So we're talking states beyond gas, liquid, solid, the standard stuff.
Kind of. Complex plasmas, even in labs, can exist in a weakly coupled state, which is very gas-like,
Yeah.
but they can also enter a strongly coupled state.
And what's that like?
It behaves more like a crystalline solid. The particles arrange themselves into ordered lattices, and the transition between these states can be quite fluid-like.
Okay, so gas, liquid, solid, but made of plasma.
The upshot is that these life forms are theorized to be effectively liquid crystals.
Liquid crystals. That implies incredible versatility in their form, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They could potentially exist as, relatively speaking, a plasma solid, a plasma liquid, or a plasma gas. The key idea is that liquid crystal state.
Meaning they can switch between structures.
Right. They could potentially flip their bodies from a more rigid crystalline structure to a fluidic one and back again. The source suggests this might be controlled by quite minor internal voltage adjustments.
That's amazing. Imagine a being that could solidify an appendage for a specific action, then instantly dissolve it back into fluid form for movement, or, I don't know, camouflage.
It fundamentally changes the definition of what a body even is.
It really does. Now let's bring in gravity. The source material confirms these entities are subject to gravity, which makes sense if they're coupled to Earth. But they're described as extremely light.
They definitely possess weight, but it's minimized precisely because of that extremely low density and the inherently low mass of their constituent dark particles.
Okay, and J. Alfred tried to quantify this somehow.
Yes, he attempted to anchor this theoretical concept by referencing data derived from neutrino tomography, which is pretty cutting-edge stuff.
Neutrino tomography, how does that work? It's not like weighing dark matter on a scale.
Not at all. It's complex physics. Researchers use large detectors like IceCube at the South Pole or Super Kamiokande in Japan to observe atmospheric neutrino oscillations.
Neutrinos passing through the Earth.
Exactly. They track how these neutrinos change flavor as they travel through the planet. Dark matter, if present in sufficient density, could potentially influence these oscillations in subtle ways.
Ah, so by looking for anomalies in the neutrino data, they can set limits on how much dark matter might be inside the Earth.
Precisely. It's about setting upper limits. The 2023 refinements, building on earlier work from around 2018 and before, used this method. Depending on the specific layer of the Earth being considered the core versus the whole planet and the confidence level, they suggested that perhaps no more than, say, 21 to 32% of Earth's total mass could be dark matter.
Okay, so still a potentially significant chunk, but it puts a cap on it.
Right. And Alfred used these kinds of estimations, specifically referencing an earlier, more conservative figure of maybe 20% of Earth's mass being dark matter spread throughout its volume.
And from that, he calculated a sort of average density for this dark Earth.
Correct. He took that percentage relative to Earth's known average density, which is about 515 kilograms per cubic meter. Doing the math gives you an average dark matter density estimate of around 1,103 kilograms per cubic meter.
1,103 kilojoule. That's remarkably close to the density of water, isn't it?
It is, surprisingly enough, about 1.1 times the density of water on average for the entire dark Earth sphere. But that's just the average.
Right. The crucial point is that the density wouldn't be uniform. It would vary massively depending on where you are within this dark Earth structure.
Exactly. Just like our Earth has a dense core and a tenuous atmosphere, the density within the dark Earth would likely vary based on the layer or shell these hypothetical life forms inhabit.
So life forms living in regions coinciding with our planet's core would be extremely dense, relatively speaking.
Extremely dense by dark plasma standards, yes. While those existing way out, maybe coinciding with our upper atmosphere or even further, would be orders of magnitude less dense.
Let's really try to internalize how light that makes them. Can you give us a concrete example, something that really drives it home?
Okay, let's take a hypothetical man-sized plasma life form. Something occupying roughly the same volume as an average 70-kilogram human.
Got it.
Now, imagine this life form exists near the surface of this dark Earth, where the ambient density is much lower. Let's say its own body density is only 1/10 that of water, so about 100 kilograms per cubic meter.
Okay, still denser than air, but much less than us.
Much less. If you calculate the total weight of that man-sized volume at that density, it comes out to only 7 kilograms.
7 kilos for something the size of a person.
Exactly, 7 kilograms. It underscores the profound difference in materiality, the same gravitational force that requires complex biological machinery for us to counteract. It barely registers for them in the same way. It completely reframes concepts like effort and mass, doesn't it?
It absolutely redefines physicality. So if density control is key to their existence and movement, how do they actively manipulate it? How do they contract their bodies against the natural tendency of plasma to expand due to heat and repulsion?
The proposed mechanism is intense magnetic compression. This is described as a feat of internal biological engineering.
Magnetic compression.
How? They'd need to reduce their volume by generating and applying time-varying magnetic fields. These fields create intense, inward-acting Lorentz forces, effectively squeezing the plasma body both radially, like tightening a belt, and axially along its length.
This sounds remarkably similar to the principles used in experimental fusion energy research, concepts like the Z-pinch or the theta pinch.
It's exactly the biological application of the pinch mechanism, according to the theory. In a lab, achieving these pinches requires rapid pulse discharges of enormous electrical currents to generate the incredibly strong transient magnetic fields needed.
Which requires massive energy storage systems like capacitor banks.
Precisely. So the hypothesis extrapolates that these plasma life forms, being complex electromagnetic entities themselves, must have evolved biological equivalents. Internal biological capacitors capable of storing and rapidly discharging pulsed currents to power these magnetic compression fields.
That's a fascinating biological feature to even contemplate a living creature with an internal capacitor system.
Right.
It has to constantly charge and discharge just to maintain its bodily form or change density.
And this leads directly to a major complication, a real balancing act. Basic physics dictates that when you compress plasma, it heats up dramatically.
Right, compression increases temperature, which increases thermal pressure, pushing outwards.
Exactly. So to successfully contract their bodies, the inward magnetic pressure they generate must not only overcome the outward thermal pressure, but it must increase faster than the thermal pressure can build up and expand the plasma.
They have to win the race, essentially. Squeeze faster than it heats up and pushes back.
They have to increase that magnetic pressure incredibly rapidly. Otherwise, the life form would simply dissipate from overheating or uncontrolled expansion.
So their density manipulation isn't a static thing. It's a constant dynamic pumping action. They're never truly still internally.
That seems to be the implication. Which means their appearance is likely never static either, leading us perfectly into Section 2. Appearance and visibility. This is where it gets really, really interesting, because their appearance seems fluid and almost entirely controlled by frequency. First off, what's their default shape?
If they have one.
Well, under the influence of Earth's gravity, the most stable, lowest energy configuration is theorized to be a teardrop, or an elongated ovoid shape, much like a candle flame on Earth, actually, which is itself a form of near-plasma.
Okay, teardrop-shaped. What about in zero gravity?
In 0G, assuming no other forces, the lowest energy state would naturally be a perfect sphere, like a soap bubble.
We mentioned shapeshifting earlier. It sounds like this structural fluidity is absolutely central to their nature.
It really is. It comes back to that incredibly low density and the vast inner particle distance, because the individual constituent particles are, on average, so far apart compared to solids or liquids.
They have a lot of room to maneuver, internally speaking.
A huge amount. They can expand and contract their overall volume tremendously just by changing that average distance between particles. This enables almost continuous size and shape shifting.
So they can generate temporary limbs or extensions?
Exactly. The source uses the term pseudopods, just like a single-celled amoeba uses. But here we're talking about potentially macroscopic extensions formed and retracted at will.
Okay, so they're inherently shapeshifters. Now, how would we actually see them, assuming we could perceive dark matter interactions? They don't just reflect light like a rock, do they?
No, they primarily emit light. The source suggests two main mechanisms. First, spontaneous emission. When their internal charged particles naturally drop to lower energy levels, they release photons, light.
Oh.
Second, they glow when their internal particles collide with high-energy particles from the surrounding environment. It's analogous to how the aurora borealis works, or even how a fluorescent light tube glows when electricity excites the gas inside.
Right. This brings us to what seems like the absolute core concept for their visibility, the plasma frequency gate. This sounds like it dictates everything about how they appear.
It really does seem to be the central control knob. Every plasma, whether ordinary or dark, has a natural frequency of collective electron oscillation. It's called the plasma frequency, and it's directly proportional to the square root of the particle number density.
So denser plasma means higher plasma frequency.
Exactly. And this specific frequency is the crucial factor determining how the life form interacts with ambient light or any electromagnetic waves hitting it. J. Alfred's work outlines 4 potential modes of visibility based on how the lifeform's internal plasma frequency compares to the frequency of the light trying to pass through it.
Okay, let's break those down. What happens at the extremes? Say, when their density is incredibly high, making the plasma frequency very high.
That's described as the arc mode, high frequency. If the internal plasma frequency is significantly greater than the frequency of the incoming ambient light, the plasma body essentially acts like a perfect electromagnetic mirror.
It reflects everything.
It reflects the light entirely, so it would appear intensely bright, shiny, perhaps even like polished metal. The source notes this could act as a kind of imperfect invisibility cloak, reflecting the surroundings, though the reflection would likely be distorted by the body's curved shape.
Okay, bright and reflective at high density. What about the other extreme? Low density, low frequency. How do they disappear?
That leads to the transparent mode, low frequency. If they lower their density so much that their plasma frequency drops below the frequency of the ambient light,
The light just goes straight through.
right, light simply passes through the body relatively unimpeded. The life form becomes transparent. It might act as a weak refractive lens, slightly bending background light as it passes through, but visually, it's essentially gone. Still physically present, but invisible.
So we have bright reflection at one end, transparency at the other. What about the states in between?
Well, there's the glow mode, moderate frequency, which is essentially a less intense version of the arc mode, still reflective and light-emitting, but maybe more of a gentle brightness or self-luminous glow rather than a hard mirror finish.
Okay. And the really intriguing one.
The really interesting intermediate state is dark mode. This occurs when the life form tunes its density so that its internal plasma frequency precisely matches the frequency of the ambient light hitting it.
Matching frequencies. That means resonance.
Exactly, a resonant absorption.
So instead of reflecting or letting light pass through, they absorb its energy.
Precisely. When any material absorbs the light hitting it, it appears dark or black to an observer. In this mode, the plasma body actively absorbs the energy from the electromagnetic wave of the light. It would appear black, dark, or like a shadow.
And potentially gain energy in the process.
That's a key implication. They might use this mode not just for camouflage, but also to actively harvest energy from their environment. It's crucial to understand dark mode isn't just turning off their glow, it's an active energy absorption process that renders them invisible in a very specific, shadowy way.
So their appearance is completely malleable, like clay, and it's directly controlled by their density, which dictates that plasma frequency. Density is literally the gateway to their visible reality.
That's a perfect way to put it. To manifest, to become visible or reflective, they increase their density, which pushes their plasma frequency up the scale, from transparent through dark up to glow or arc mode.
And to disappear.
They decrease density, letting the frequency drop back down, from bright through dark again, maybe, and down into transparency. They're likely constantly cycling through these modes based on environmental conditions, perceived threats, or internal intentions.
Incredible. Let's talk a bit more about their composition then. Section 2.3 mentions photonic composition, which sounds, well, exotic. It suggests light itself can be used as a building block.
This is where standard physics starts to get really stretched into the theoretical. The idea is that when light photons travel through a very dense or complex plasma medium, the individual photons interact strongly with the collective charge oscillations.
Okay.
Through these interactions, the photons effectively gain inertial mass. They become more matter-like. The theory suggests that life forms in higher energy sectors of these dark Earths might increasingly utilize these heavy, matter-like dark photons as primary building blocks for their bodies.
So their bodies become increasingly radiation-based. Less plasma, more light.
Progressively so, especially in the theorized higher energy realms. This leads directly to concepts like a light body.
A light body? Like something on science fiction or fantasy. How does this photon density affect their appearance?
A lower density or less organized structure of these dark photons might result in what's described as a fiery or molten look, maybe like glowing coals or shifting liquid fire.
Okay.
But a high density, particularly in those higher energy dark Earth sectors, could yield a true light body, something luminous and seemingly less substantial. The most evolved entities in this framework are envisioned as continuously decreasing their mass, potentially becoming almost pure, nearly massless configurations of dark photons.
Wow. And their color isn't fixed either, is it? It's described as thermochromic?
Yes, because their underlying structure is liquid crystalline, it's inherently highly responsive to changes in temperature and internal energy fluctuations. This directly affects how they interact with light, causing their color to change.
Is there a real-world analogy for that?
Think of chameleons. They don't change color using pigments primarily. They change the physical spacing between nanoscale photonic crystals in their skin cells.
Ah, changing the structure changes the reflected wavelength.
Exactly. When the chameleon is relaxed, the crystals are close together, reflecting shorter wavelengths like blue and green. When it gets agitated or stressed, the crystals move further apart, reflecting longer wavelengths like yellow and red.
So similarly, for these plasma life forms, their color is a direct, real-time readout of their internal energy state or stress level.
Precisely. The theory suggests their color changes directly indicate their energy levels and even their emotional or stress states.
Which means they're basically walking, glowing, emotional billboards. Observing them would be like looking at a real-time, functional MRI of their brain and body state.
That's a fantastic analogy. The instantaneous shifts in brightness, intensity, color patterns, even texture, are hypothesized to be direct reflections of their emotional and mental states. Bright, clear, vibrant colors might suggest positive emotions or high energy. Dark, muddied, or turbulent colors could imply stress, negative emotions, or perhaps physical strain.
It implies an immediate public psychological diagnosis. There's no hiding how they feel, if that concept applies.
Very little room for deception in that model, yes.
And their surface isn't smooth either. Just like the sun, their plasma body is described as showing constant activity.
Definitely not smooth or static. The bodies are expected to display a whole range of phenomena analogous to what we see on the sun or other plasma bodies. They might have coronas.
Like personal auras.
Exactly, generated as charged particles spiral along their internal magnetic field lines and collide with ambient particles in the surrounding plasmasphere. It's the same mechanism as the aurora borealis, but localized to their body.
What else?
They might exhibit spicules, short-lived jets of plasma shooting outwards, striations alternating dark and bright bands or patterns, possibly caused by internal pressure waves or instabilities, and granulations, those mottled cellular patterns you see on the sun's surface, resulting from plasma convection cells carrying energy from the interior outwards.
So their bodies are these dynamic, restless energy sculptures, constantly bubbling, flowing, changing shape, color, and brightness.
That's the picture painted by the theory, yes. Continuously in flux.
Incredible. Okay, let's shift gears. Section 3, locomotion. They can change density and appearance at will. Fantastic. But how do they actually move through this dark Earth environment? The outline suggests 3 main categories of movement, starting with the most basic, buoyant movement.
Right. Buoyancy seems to be the foundational method, especially in what's described as the plasma ocean, the fluid-like dark plasmasphere itself. Their body, despite its complexity, can be treated somewhat like a neutral particle within this fluid, subject to the interplay of gravity pulling it down and buoyancy pushing it up.
So moving up or down is simply a matter of changing their density.
Exactly. The core physiological mechanism we discussed earlier, density manipulation, becomes their primary means of vertical movement. If they decrease their overall body density to be less than the surrounding ambient plasma density, they float upwards.
And if they increase density?
They sink downwards. They achieve equilibrium, just staying suspended perfectly within a specific layer or shell of the dark Earth, when their overall specific gravity equals 1.
Meaning their body density precisely matches the density of the plasma surrounding them in that layer.
Correct. And since the plasmasphere is likely layered by density, just like Earth's atmosphere or oceans, different types of life forms might naturally inhabit different shells based on their typical operating density. Moving between these shells would require active energy expenditure to change density.
And the source also notes something interesting. Bodies with similar densities and temperatures, and therefore similar resonant frequencies, tend to congregate together.
Yes, this seems to be a direct consequence of sympathetic resonance. It's a basic physical principle. Objects or systems with similar natural vibrational frequencies tend to influence each other, exchange energy efficiently, and naturally align or group together. So communities might form based on shared resonant properties within these density layers.
Okay, so that's floating and sinking. What about more active directed movement? The mechanical methods. What's the first one listed?
Electric winds. This is fascinating. The idea is that these life forms can generate powerful, directed blasts of neutral gas.
Neutral gas. How?
By engineering strong collisions between their own internal charged particles and the neutral particles present in the ambient dark plasma environment. This momentum transfer creates a directed flow, a wind.
Is there a lab equivalent?
Yes, there are experimental plasma actuators or plasma fans that work on this principle. They use electrical discharges to ionize air and then use electric fields to accelerate the ions, which collide with neutral air molecules, creating thrust without any moving mechanical blades.
So these life forms could use biological versions of that to propel themselves.
That's the theory, generating localized electric winds for propulsion, perhaps achieving speeds of a few meters per second.
Okay. And the next mechanical method sounds more familiar. Jet propulsion.
This is highly analogous to how a squid or octopus moves. The life form could internally generate powerful plasma vortexes.
Like little whirlpools inside them.
Sort of. They'd use these vortexes to suck in ambient plasma particles, perhaps process them or energize them internally, and then forcefully expel them out through an opposing orifice or nozzle.
Creating thrust. Newton's third law.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Generate directed thrust. And their navigation using this method could be significantly aided by tapping into the naturally occurring magnetohydrodynamic MHD currents that are presumed to exist within the plasma ocean itself, like a swimmer using ocean currents to travel more efficiently.
Right, riding the existing flows. And there's a third mechanical method mentioned, mostly for the more evolved light-based life forms.
Yes, photonic propulsion. For those advanced plasmonic entities whose bodies are theorized to be increasingly composed of radiation or those heavy photons.
They can push themselves with light?
Essentially, yes. They could potentially generate a focused, directed blast of photons using the radiation pressure itself for propulsion. It's similar in principle to how the solar wind exerts pressure on objects in space, or the concept behind solar sails, but generated internally and used for controlled movement.
Buoyancy, electric winds, jet propulsion, photonic propulsion. Now for what sounds like the most advanced and efficient method. Electromagnetic movement. The outline calls it the dark plasma subway. How does that work?
This method relies entirely on leveraging the presumed electromagnetic infrastructure of the dark Earth environment itself. The plasmasphere is thought to be permeated by natural electric fields and, crucially, extensive magnetic field lines.
Like the Earth's own magnetic field lines.
Analogous, yes, but potentially much more complex and structured within the dark plasma. The key capability of the life form here is its theorized ability to temporarily alter its own internal charge distribution and polarity.
Meaning they can make parts of their body act like charged particles, make one end positive and the other negative, for instance.
Precisely. By doing this, these specific temporarily charged parts of their body would then directly interact with the ambient electromagnetic fields.
And basic physics tells us charged particles are accelerated by electric fields.
And guided or channeled by magnetic field lines.
So they latch onto the magnetic field lines like rails.
That's the perfect analogy. They get accelerated by the electric fields present and are then guided along the magnetic field lines. The source specifically identifies the network of Birkeland currents as potentially being the critical tracks in the system.
Birkeland currents. Those are the massive filamentary electrical currents that flow along magnetic field lines connecting planetary and stellar objects, right? We see their effects in auroras.
Exactly those. If such currents exist within the dark Earth structure, these life forms could essentially plug into this natural power grid, moving along these currents like maglev trains using magnetic levitation and propulsion.
The speeds achieved moving along these cosmic scale currents must be potentially enormous.
That's the implication, likely far exceeding the speeds possible with mechanical propulsion. And this leads to a fascinating point about the subjective experience.
What's that?
The source suggests that moving at such extreme speeds along these guided magnetic tracks would give the life form the subjective sensation of moving by thought alone.
Because it's so fast and directed.
Yes.
Yeah.
While the movement is fundamentally electromagnetic, harnessing existing fields and currents, the rapidity and efficiency could make it feel almost instantaneous, like pure intention directly manifesting as movement across vast distances.
Wow. Okay, that covers how they might move. Let's transition now to Section 4, the intelligent life. If these entities are potentially complex and intelligent, how do they communicate? And what might their brains even look like? The outline lists several communication methods, starting with acoustic waves for medium range.
Right. They likely utilize standard acoustic pressure waves, just like sound in air or water, but uniquely within a plasma environment, they can also employ Alphen waves.
Alphen waves. What are those exactly?
They're a type of magnetohydrodynamic wave. Instead of being pressure oscillations, they are transverse vibrations that travel along the magnetic field lines themselves. Think of it like plucking a magnetic string. The restoring force is magnetic tension, not physical pressure.
Okay, so how does this relate to communication?
The theory suggests that the neural correlates of their thoughts and emotions, the subtle electromagnetic fluctuations within their cognitive structures, their brain equivalent, would naturally generate both standard acoustic waves and these alpha waves within their plasma bodies.
And these waves then radiate outwards.
Yes, and because the theorized dark Earth environment is generally low density, these waves could potentially travel quite efficiently without dissipating quickly. They would essentially emit a characteristic acoustic sound signature that's constantly modulated by their real-time physical and psychological state.
So another being could listen to this signature.
Potentially, yes. A receiver, especially one with a similar density and resonant frequency, might vibrate in sympathetic unison with the incoming waves, allowing for decoding of the information encoded within that signature.
Okay, that's medium range. What about long-range communication? The source points to electromagnetic waves.
This is perhaps more intuitive, given they are fundamentally electromagnetic bodies. Their internal processes, thoughts, emotions, biological functions would naturally generate modulated electromagnetic waves and pulsating EM fields.
We do that too, right?
Yeah.
Our brains and hearts generate weak EM fields.
You do, but in our dense, largely neutral matter environment, the range of those fields is negligible, maybe a meter or so for the heart's field. For plasma life forms existing within a highly conductive plasma environment, the potential range and strength of these biologically generated EM fields could be vastly greater.
And the theory suggests they enhance this capability with specialized biological structures.
Yes, it hypothesizes they possess specialized cells or structures that function as evolved plasma antennae.
Plasma antenna, like antenna made of plasma.
Exactly. This is actually something being researched in labs today for ordinary matter applications. A plasma antenna uses ionized gas confined within a tube, like glass, instead of metal elements.
What are the advantages?
They can be dynamically reconfigured, steered electronically, and turned on and off almost instantly, unlike a fixed metal antenna. They can also handle high power. The source suggests these life forms evolved biological versions of these.
Which would allow for highly efficient directed transmission and reception of complex EM signals.
Precisely. Tuned to specific high frequencies. This potentially allows for direct thought transmission across significant distances, essentially, telepathy via modulated dark electromagnetic waves.
Why high frequencies specifically?
The source notes this might be necessary to avoid signal absorption or scattering by the free electrons generally present in the plasmasphere, similar to how low-frequency radio signals struggle to penetrate Earth's ionosphere. High frequencies cut through better.
So between their visual appearance revealing their state and their acoustic and electromagnetic signatures broadcasting it, they're very open books.
It seems that way. And those unique signatures, the specific composite plasma frequency, the modulation of their EM fields, their acoustic resonance, become crucial for identity verification.
Ah, since they can change shape so readily.
Yeah.
Their energy signature is their real identifier, like a biometric fingerprint, but electromagnetic.
Exactly. That unique resonance profile is theorized to be their unforgeable form of authentication, regardless of what holographic appearance they might be projecting at any given moment.
Okay, let's cover the short-range, near-field communication methods. The first one mentioned is projecting holograms.
Yes, generating plasma thought-modulated holograms at short range. If a life form wants to convey a complex idea, a specific image, or maybe a symbol, it could potentially project a small, tangible, holographic representation of it directly towards the intended receiver.
A little 3D thought picture.
Something like that. And the second short-range method is even more exotic: plasma bubble drives. Bubble drives.
This involves a physical delivery of information. The life form could discharge a soliton. A soliton? Is that?
It's a special kind of wave, a self-reinforcing solitary wave that maintains its shape, size, and speed as it propagates without dispersing like normal waves. Think of it like a stable thought ball or maybe an information zip file encoded in a stable plasma structure.
Oh, yeah.
This soliton bubble is discharged, perhaps through a vortex, and travels physically to the recipient. The receiving life form then absorbs this bubble and directly decodes the information package contained within it into its own neural structure, like receiving a data packet directly.
That's wild. Let's turn now to cognition itself. What factors are proposed to give these life forms, especially in higher energy dark Earths, potentially vastly superior cognitive capacity compared to us.
J. Alfred's work highlights three primary factors that could contribute to this. First, the possibility of a higher dimensional neural architecture.
Meaning their brains aren't limited to 3 spatial dimensions.
Potentially. If their cognitive structures utilize higher spatial dimensions, that would allow for significantly more complex interconnectivity, vastly more nodes and connections packed into a given volume than our 3D brains can manage.
Okay, more connections equals more processing power. What's the second factor?
The transition towards photonic-based neural processes. As we discussed, their bodies might become increasingly radiation-like, composed of those heavy, dark photons. If their neural signaling also becomes light-based.
Signals travel at or near the speed of light internally.
Exactly. That would offer a colossal speed advantage over the electrochemical signaling in our brains.
And the third factor pushes things even further into the quantum realm.
Right. The theory suggests that the matter composing the higher dark energy sectors might exhibit more pronounced macroscopic quantum behaviors. If so, their neural processes could potentially incorporate genuine photonic quantum computing capacity.
A brain that operates like a quantum computer, using light.
That's the idea. A biological system capable of leveraging quantum phenomena like superposition and entanglement for computation would represent an intelligence leap so vast it's hard for us to even conceptualize. Classical computation would seem primitive in comparison.
So we're not just talking about individual intelligent beings, but potentially vast networks of living, interconnected biocomputers, or the lines between biology and what we think of as artificial intelligence completely blur.
They are envisioned as networked electromagnetic entities, and logically, their sensory systems would need to be radically upgraded to match this cognitive capacity.
How so?
Operating at vastly higher frequencies and bandwidths than human senses. The source suggests that lower frequency human sensations like smell and taste might be superseded entirely by extremely high frequency, high fidelity audio and visual sensations perceiving colors and sounds far beyond our limited human range, perhaps even new sensory modalities altogether.
And they sense differently too.
Yes, more like unicellular organisms, in a way, sensing stimuli from all directions simultaneously, without needing dedicated, forward-facing sense organs like eyes and ears. This would give them a radically comprehensive 360-degree awareness of their immediate environment.
Mind-boggling. Now this leads us directly into the final section, Section 5. Shaping Reality Holographic Environment Modification. This feels like the culmination of everything we've discussed. If their thoughts are transmitted via EM waves, and the plasma environment is so responsive, how does that connection allow them to literally mold their surroundings?
This concept is deeply rooted in theories about how our own brains might store memory, specifically drawing parallels with holographic principles. Think back to neuroscientists like Carl Lashley, who found memories weren't stored in single locations, and Carl Pribram's holonomic theory of the brain.
Pribram suggested memory isn't like a photograph, but more like a hologram, right? Stored as interference patterns across the brain.
Exactly. The brain computes an abstract mathematical representation, a holographic code based on wave-phase relationships, probably using Fourier transforms, and stores memories as overlapping interference patterns distributed throughout neural networks, not as literal pictures.
Okay, so the brain computes this holographic code internally. How does that connect to the plasma environment for these life forms?
In the dark Earths, the theory proposes this cognitive process of generating holographic codes interfaces directly with the ionized plasma environment itself. The plasma acts as the recording and projection medium, the holographic plate, if you will.
So their thought-modulated EM waves directly imprint holographic patterns onto the surrounding plasma.
That's the core idea. Their minds directly generate interference patterns that reconstruct into matter-like images within the highly responsive plasma medium.
The outline details 3 main types of plasma holography they might use. Let's start with plasmoid holography.
This is perhaps the most straightforward to visualize. It involves using tiny, self-contained globules of plasma, called plasmoids, as individual building blocks. Think of them as programmable 3D pixels, or voxels.
Voxels in the air.
Essentially, yes. These microscopic plasmoids can be generated in position, and their individual properties like temperature, density, and therefore color, brightness, and texture can be controlled to build up a 3-dimensional image.
Is there any real-world work like this?
There is. Researchers have demonstrated using focused, pulsed lasers to ionize points in midair, creating glowing plasma voxels. By rapidly scanning the laser, they can create visible 3D images floating in space that are even touchable and can generate sound all without needing a physical screen.
Wow, so these life forms can do this biologically.
The theory suggests yes. Networks of fine filamentary electrical currents within their bodies might cross at specific nodes, generating these microscopic plasmoids, internally creating an endogenous hologram that modifies their own appearance.
And externally.
By manipulating weak electric fields naturally present in the surrounding plasmasphere, they could potentially generate exogenous holograms, tangible images projected outside their bodies into the environment.
Okay, that's plasmoids as pixels.
Right.
What about plasmonic holography? This sounds more complex, involving things that are part light, part matter.
It is more complex. This method utilizes plasmons, which are those collective oscillations of charges we discussed earlier, typically on the surface of conductive materials or within plasmas.
Okay.
When light interacts with these plasmons under the right conditions, it can create hybrid quasiparticles called plasmon polaritons. The source describes these as being roughly 50% light, photonic, and 50% matter, plasmonic excitation.
Half light, half matter.
Yeah.
How does that create a hologram?
The theory suggests that denser layers within the dark Earth plasmasphere could act like the reflective solid surface needed for holography, analogous to the silver layer on a holographic plate in lab experiments. When the life form's thought-modulated EM waves strike this resonant layer—
Resonant, meaning the thought frequency matches the plasma frequency of that layer.
Exactly. This resonant interaction excites plasmons, generating these plasmon polaritons, which then propagate and interfere to reconstruct incredibly realistic, tangible, matter-like holographic images. It's like generating temporary solid objects purely from thought interacting with the environment's resonant properties.
Generating matter from thought by hitting the right frequency.
Oh.
Amazing. And the third type, acoustic holography. Using sound to shape things.
Yes, this relies on the fact that acoustic waves, sound, carry momentum and exert physical pressure, a mechanical force. This force can be used to manipulate particles and shape a medium.
Are there examples of this?
Absolutely. Think of cymatics, the beautiful, intricate patterns formed when powders or fluids on a plate are vibrated by specific sound frequencies. That's sound organizing matter. More recently, researchers have used arrays of precisely controlled ultrasound speakers to create focused acoustic pressure fields. These fields can levitate small particles and even sculpt 3D shapes in mediums like water by modulating the holographic information through the sound waves themselves. They formed replicas of things like Picasso's Pistove using only sound.
So these life forms could use their acoustic emissions, those sound signatures we talked about, to physically sculpt the surrounding plasma.
That's the implication. Using focused sound, perhaps including those Alvan waves, to exert mechanical force and create tangible 3D acoustic holograms.
This level of direct mental influence over the environment sounds almost dangerous. Let's talk about the ease with which thought seems to mold reality for them.
This comes back to the fundamental difference in density and binding forces between their environment and ours. The subtle force generated by a thought or an emotion is incredibly weak in our dense, ordinary matter world where particles are strongly bound together. It causes barely a ripple.
But in their low-density, weakly interacting plasma environment,
that same subtle mental force is dramatically amplified. The source uses the moon jump analogy. The same muscle force that gives you a small hop on Earth lets you leap huge distances on the moon due to lower gravity. Here, the gravity holding the plasma together is much weaker.
So a thought-modulated EM wave, or acoustic wave that would do nothing here, can easily excite plasmons, generate plasmoids, and create significant holographic structures there.
With potentially terrifying ease, yes. This leads to a profound challenge hypothesized for these life forms. It might be incredibly difficult for them to psychologically detach what they observe or merely think about from what actually manifests in their macroscopic environment.
They're constantly, perhaps unconsciously, shaping their reality with every stray thought and fleeting emotion.
That seems to be the implication, which makes control over one's internal state managing thoughts, regulating emotions, maintaining clear intention not just a matter of psychological well-being, but potentially the most fundamental mechanism for maintaining a stable environment and ensuring basic survival.
Wow. Emotional regulation as a primary biological function for survival.
Arguably, yes. If your mind directly and powerfully shapes matter around you, controlling that mind becomes paramount.
This inherent vulnerability, or perhaps power, leads directly to the concept of collective community holograms. What happens when large groups of these entities share the same thoughts or beliefs?
When large populations of similar-minded, intelligent life forms focus on the same concepts or intentions, their individually generated thought-modulated electromagnetic waves would be harmonically similar. They'd resonate.
Like tuning forks vibrating together.
Exactly. This leads to constructive interference, where the waves add together, amplifying each other dramatically. Through this sympathetic resonance, similar thought holograms generated by the group would effectively clump together, connect, reinforce, and densify, producing hyper-realistic, persistent, shared augmented realities within their environment.
So, entire groups could collectively create and inhabit holographic structures, buildings, landscapes, maybe even representations of deities or abstract concepts purely through consensus belief. It sounds like Star Trek's holodeck, but powered by collective consciousness.
That's a very apt analogy. It's a shared holographic thought form superimposed onto and interacting with the base plasma environment. If a whole community strongly believes in certain structures or entities, their collective mental focus could potentially generate localized, highly realistic, and persistent representations of those things within their shared space.
What happens then if observers have conflicting thoughts or expectations about what they're seeing?
If different observers are radiating conflicting thought-modulated waves, different beliefs or expectations about the same phenomenon, those waves would interfere destructively.
They cancel each other out.
Right. The conflicting signals would result in no clear, amplified holographic pattern being formed or sustained. In such a case, the theory suggests an observed life form or phenomenon might revert to its simplest default state, perhaps that bright amorphous ovoid shape we discussed earlier. No consensus, no complex form.
This could also explain why different observers might report seeing very different things when encountering such phenomena. Their own expectations are interfering with each other's perceptions.
That's a potential implication, yes. And related to this, the source mentions one final, fascinating mechanism: how a receiving life form might actually transform its own appearance to mirror the observer's expectations, creating a perfect confirmation bias loop.
How could it do that?
Through that plasmoid-induced hologram mechanism, but within its own body, the life form could potentially detect the incoming mental broadcast, the thought-modulated EM wave carrying the observer's expectation or belief. It could then rapidly reconfigure its own internal microscopic plasmoids, its own voxels, to physically generate an appearance that conforms precisely to what the observer expects to see.
So if a group of observers expects to see, say, a specific angelic or demonic shape, the plasma life form could instantaneously shift its internal structure to match that expectation,
providing immediate, hyper-realistic, first-hand confirmation of the observer's pre-existing bias or belief. It's a potent feedback loop where belief directly shapes the perceived reality, mediated by the life form itself acting as a responsive holographic projector.
It almost sounds like a defense mechanism, or maybe a communication strategy in itself.
It could be interpreted in many ways. The source also notes that random, uncoordinated collective thoughts, background mental noise without critical mass or clear intention, might only manifest as unstable, simpler proto-life forms. Amorphous globules, shifting cylinders, things that behave erratically like simple cellular automata, lacking the coherence to form stable, complex structures until a unifying thought or intention emerges.
This has been an absolutely mind-expanding deep dive into the theoretical biophysics proposed by independent researcher J. Alfred. We've journeyed from the astonishingly low density and the versatile liquid crystal nature of potential plasma life,
through the intense magnetic compression seemingly required just to maintain bodily structure.
And we uncovered those 4 distinct modes of visibility, all governed by the plasma frequency gate, controlled by density.
We explored the possible dark plasma subway system for locomotion along Birkeland currents, feeling like movement by thought alone.
And the radical implications of potentially higher dimensional, photonic, even quantum computing principles being applied to biological cognition.
And perhaps most critically, we saw how, in this hypothesized realm, the mind isn't just an observer, it's an active participant, directly shaping macroscopic matter through holographic principles.
What's really striking, I think, is the realization that if J. Alfred's hypothesis holds any water, then controlling one's internal state, thoughts, emotions, intentions becomes the absolute ultimate survival skill.
It really reframes everything. In the dark earth, emotional regulation, mental discipline, that's arguably the most critical biological function, because the mind is the primary tool that maintains not only personal structural integrity, but potentially shapes the entire shared reality.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to really chew on. If these hypothetical dark plasma life forms, which are theorized to be gravitationally coupled to our own planet, can indeed mold their environments through collective thought and resonance,
Hmm.
what might that imply, if anything, about the subtle, perhaps entirely unnoticed ways that our own collective attention, our consensus beliefs, or even our dominant emotional states might be interacting with and subtly shaping the ordinary matter world we inhabit? Are there echoes of this connection even here?
A profound question to ponder.
We'll leave you with that thought. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.